All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today at the Regional Transportation Committee. My name is Colleen Whitlow. I'm the mayor for Town of Meade and also the chair of DRCOG, and we'll get started. We'll open it up for public comment. Jazz, do we have anyone online that would like to speak during this part of the agenda? Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Jacob for an introduction of a new staff member.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. First, I'll just take liberty to say thank you all so much for being here today. We are so excited to try this time of day in this format with lunch. Hopefully the food is great. Glad to have you all. And I do want to take the opportunity to introduce the newest member of our team, Jazz Cooper Moore. Jazz, raise your hand. Down in the corner is our new division assistant for our Transportation Planning and Operations Division. She replaces Cam Kennedy, for those of you that knew Cam. We are so glad to have her. She's a rock star and really making things run smoothly, and we're just glad to have her here, so thank you.
All right, thank you and welcome again, Jazz. All right, we'll move on to May 19, 2026 Regional Transportation Committee meeting summary. Are there any changes or comments from the committee? And seeing none as being. Next is our action item for the day. It's Human Services Transportation set aside in Section 5310 project. This is presented by Travis Newton, our manager at AAA Business Operations.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have for the committee today recommended supplementary funding for the Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 and the Human Services Transportation Set-Aside projects. These projects were brought before the committee last month. Realizing that's really small, so I'm trying to make it a little bit bigger there for y'all. The original projects were brought to the committee back in May. And when we make those original recommendations, we typically are working off of estimated funding that's available as we await for full apportionments to be made available from the Federal Transit Administration. After we brought these to the Transportation Advisory Committee, the full apportionments from the FTA were available, and the amount of funding that was available for this coming fiscal year was a little over $200,000 higher than we had estimated. And so typically, if it was a smaller portion, we wouldn't come back to you all with changes, but because it's a significant amount of funding and because there's a need for the funding in the region for these projects, we are bringing these recommendations to allocate this $200,000 to you all. We went back to the committee that made the original recommendations for the projects and asked them how they would want to allocate this additional $200,000. The funding is being allocated to fully fund the mobility management and operating projects to the extent that we were able to. The only one that is not fully funded here is Laredon. The reason for that is because 5310 has limits to the amount of operating assistance we can fund in regulation. And so that was the only project that is not being fully funded. And then the remaining money that was after allocating the fully funded projects for operating mobility management was recommended to Via Mobility Services to pave their parking lot. So that's a little over $64,000. In general, from this call for projects, allocating this additional $200,000 essentially means all of the projects were recommended for funding that came in. All of the operating, all the mobility management, aside from Laredon's, were fully funded, and the capital projects were fully funded as well. Via's project was the only one from the prior recommendations that wasn't recommended, the paving parking lot, but it is being recommended at a smaller portion here. I'm happy to answer any questions, but we are asking for a motion to recommend these additional funding to the board.
Thank you, Travis. Do we have any questions or comments for Travis today? Hearing none, may I have a motion to recommend to the Board of Directors the supplementary Federal Transit Administrative Section 5310 and Human Services Transportation Set-Aside project funding for the period beginning in July 1st, 2026 and ending June 30th, 2027 as recommended by the review panel. So moved. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Any opposed? All right. Thank you, Travis, very much. Okay, we'll move on to our informational briefings today. The first one is our Regional Transportation Committee orientation. To Jacob when he gets up there.
Okay, first time I get to say this. Good afternoon, everyone. Not good morning at 8:30 in the morning. Given this new kind of format, new time of day for these meetings, and given that we have some new committee members and haven't done this orientation for a few years, it seemed timely to just give you a refresher on kind of what we do in this committee and how that fits within our larger planning process at DRCOG. Oh, and I didn't introduce myself. You all know me, but Jacob Rieger, for the record, Transportation Planning and Operations Director at DRCOG. So you all know what DRCOG is. I'm not going to read the slide to you, but just remember, we really work in three key areas. Obviously, this committee is concerned with transportation and mobility. We also work in the areas of growth and development and aging and disability resources as kind of the three themes of the work that we do at DRCOG. Our area, we are a pretty large area, being out west. We have 9 counties plus Southwest Weld, 59 member governments, a 59-member board. We have a geographic area that is comparable to the state of Connecticut and a population that's comparable to the state of Utah. We are also the traditional territory of several Native American tribes in this area. We have several roles and wear several hats at DRCOG, as you all know. This committee is primarily concerned with our function of being the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is a federal designation for transportation planning. By state statute, we are also the Regional Planning Commission. We have that designation, and then we are the Area Agency on Aging for most of our DRCOG area, though we have a couple other AAAs, as we call them, within our ecosystem as well that we work with. I forgot that was animated. I'll animate that through. This is just kind of a reminder from the big picture that we are not a regulator. We are a convener. We bring folks together to work on those big issues in this region to make life better. We are a bridge between partner jurisdictions and other agencies. We provide policy guidance and identify best practices, among many other things that we do here at DRCOG. Here is that vast planning area. This is as it stands currently today, as noted in the title. And as you all know, we are working to expand our Metropolitan Planning Organization area boundary to include Clear Creek County and Gilpin County. Hopefully that will be approved by the governor within the next couple months or so. But those counties are already part of our DRCOG planning area, which is the area kind of in blue. Or actually the area in kind of blackish. So we're showing 3 boundaries here. Our overall DRCOG planning area, which is the most expansive, our current Metropolitan Planning Organization area boundary, which is the more urbanized part of our region, which is in orange, and then our Area Agency on Aging boundary in the blue. I'll let that animate through. You know, the work that we do, the plans that we have, they all integrate together into a larger whole. Starts with our MetroVision plan that I know you all are familiar with, sort of our equivalent of a local government's comprehensive plan. You know, what is that big picture vision for the region? What do we want to be in this region when we grow up? The MetroVision Regional Transportation Plan helps to implement MetroVision as a federal requirement specifically around transportation planning. Every MPO has a version of a regional transportation plan. Part of that is what we call our fiscally constrained or cost feasible component. I'll get into this in a few slides. You know, what can we actually say that based on the revenues we expect over time, what projects and investments can we afford? That's our fiscally constrained component of our regional transportation plan. And then we help implement that through our transportation improvement program. Both of those documents are subject to another federal requirement related to air quality conformity. So wearing our kind of federal lens here, we do have several federally directed responsibilities. One thing I'll point out, you know, when we talk about the bipartisan infrastructure law or the draft, you know, Build America 250 Act, or the older ones, ICE-T, Safety Lou, FAST Act, all of those, you know, they tend to get portrayed in the media as the money, and they do contain the money, right? The funding for surface transportation over a set period of time. But what's also really important for us is that along with those funding allocations from Congress is also our planning requirements. It's under these federal surface transportation authorizations that we derive our responsibilities and our obligations and the great work that we do from a transportation perspective. The Metropolitan Planning Organization under federal law leads the regional transportation planning process within a metropolitan area. That's what we do here. But we do that in close cooperation and partnership with, in particular, I'll show you a partnership slide, but in particular, under federal law with CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation, and the Regional Transportation District, or RTD. And it's that three-legged stool, as we call it, that together we comply with the federal requirements around what's known as a continuing cooperative and comprehensive planning process under federal law. That planning process requires specific products, activities, and processes, and I'll show you a few of those. And then we do have other federal requirements sort of beyond the core transportation planning related to things like Title VI and some other requirements, the National Environmental Policy Act, and things that we all deal with in our day jobs. We have some state-directed responsibilities as well. Again, as I said, we serve as the Regional Planning Commission. That's a designation under state law, which empowers us to make and adopt regional plans like MetroVision. We're required under state law as well to develop a 20-year transportation plan, just the same as under federal law. Specific state requirement as part of our regional transportation planning work. We comply with the state greenhouse gas reduction rule that was passed by the Colorado Transportation Commission back in late 2021. Under some state legislation from the General Assembly, we must approve under Senate Bill 9208, so this is an older one, we must approve any fixed guideway transit system proposed by RTD before construction can proceed. Under some newer legislation from this very recent legislative session, we will now have a new role starting in, I believe, 2028, that we will recommend candidates for the governor to appoint one seat to the RTD board. We have had a historic requirement under state law to review roadway tolling proposals. We haven't had it in the last few years, but there was a time when we, had new toll proposals coming in that we are actually under state law. We review those for inclusion in our fiscally constrained regional transportation plan. And then we are part of CDOT's statewide transportation advisory committee, known as the STAC. Councilor Emily Bear from Erie is our STAC representative. And we do that under another state designation under state law. We are the Greater Denver Transportation Planning Region, or TPR. And STAC is a collection of the 15 TPRs, the 10 rural TPRs, and the 5 metropolitan planning organizations that are also TPRs, all sit together on STAC, which is itself an advisory committee to the Transportation Commission. So some primary transportation functions, hopefully these are all pretty familiar to you. Operation maintenance of our continuing transportation planning process, as I alluded to, within our Metropolitan Planning Organization, our MPO boundary. Federal law and regulatory compliance, maintaining eligibility for federal funding. That's not the most exciting thing we do, but it actually is one of the most important. We are certified every 4 years under federal law, known as quadrennial certification, that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing in our planning process. We are complying with federal law, and it's through that process that we maintain this region's eligibility for federal funding for transportation. We have several work products and things that we do to help us do that. You've hopefully heard of these before, our Unified Planning Work Program, which is what we as a staff are doing. It's our staff work program over a 2-year period. What are the things that we are working on in service of this region for transportation planning? We have our Regional Transportation Plan, our Transportation Improvement Program. We are unique among MPOs in the country. Only a few have this component to our work. We have a Transportation Operations Program. Greg McKinnon spoke to you about 4 months ago, give or take, giving you an overview of our Regional Transportation Operations Program relating to operations, signals, and technology. We do a lot of modal plans, meaning mode-specific, bicycle, pedestrian, transit, freight. We do a lot of those plans and technical activities associated with those plans. And then this last bullet I won't read to you, but we work in all of those areas and more. There is a lot that the great transportation staff here and the other staff in DRCOG undertake in service of the region. And in addition to all of those things, we also do some other things. We do provide technical assistance to our local governments and our stakeholder agencies. We do a lot of transportation modeling and local area planning and project support for our local governments and our partners. We do scenario planning both as part of our work, but sometimes for you all as well when you ask for that, wanting to do some scenario planning, we do that function for you. We do a lot of local transportation plan, corridor study, and project development support. We do some of that work directly. You're actually going to hear in an upcoming agenda item some of the community-based transportation plans that we've taken on and lead directly. But when you all as local governments or agencies take on a NEPA study or planning environmental linkages or a corridor study, we help you and support that as well. We have a very robust regional data catalog, data dashboards, story maps. We work really hard to make data come alive in this region. We make those, we publish them on our website. We make those resources available for the region to use in planning work. So I promised you a partnership slide, and this is probably not even all the partners, but it is some of the main partners that we work with. Several of you are in this room, other agencies, state agencies, our transportation management associations, other folks that we work with to do this great work that we all do together in this region. And our strength, and this is a lesson I learned when I came to DRCOG 14 years ago, we are our relationships, we are our partnerships. We could not do the work that we do without everyone on this screen and everyone else. And this is even a list of our 59 member local governments. These are just the other partners that we work with. So real quick, a couple kind of specific major processes and products that we produce as part of our transportation planning work. First is the Regional Transportation Plan. You all have heard about this over the last 2 years as we've been embarking on a major update that's required under federal law. We do a major update to the plan every 4 years. We will adopt that updated plan later this fall. The plan, as you know, really brings together, it integrates with MetroVision and our MetroVision framework, but it really brings together how this region is growing, how it's changing, the needs, the wants, the priorities, the desires in terms of multimodal transportation, regardless of project sponsor, regardless of funding source, regardless of who owns the facility. It brings together everything that we're collectively doing in this region related to transportation, and it really sets what we call the priority project and program investment priorities for the region. What do we want for multimodal transportation, whether that's roadways, transit, fast tracks, transit, bicycle, pedestrian, operations, maintenance, all of it is covered by our regional transportation plan. And then, as I said, we implement that through the Transportation Improvement Program. We would do this anyway, but it actually is a federal requirement that for major projects, major big projects, to be eligible to compete for funding in our Transportation Improvement Program, they must first be contained within our fiscally constrained Regional Transportation Plan. So as you all know, our TIP is our kind of short range. It's our 4-year kind of program. What are we funding? What are we constructing? What are we building and studying and planning for now as a region? So it contains all those projects with federal and state transportation funding. We are responsible in this region as an MPO for programming these different funding sources that come from the federal and state governments. Surface Transportation Block Grant, which is our most common and flexible funding source, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, known as CMAQ. MMOF, as we more commonly know it, but it's actually Multimodal and Mitigation Options Fund. This is a state funding source that we program through the TIP. We have a relatively new funding source in the bipartisan infrastructure law known as the Carbon Reduction Program. We've had a round or two of programming what we call CRP funds, and then Transportation Alternatives funding. CDOT programs some of these as well, statewide. We are responsible for programming these funds, again, within this metropolitan area. In addition to these direct sort of funding funds that we program in our 4-year TIP call, we also do set-asides. You're very familiar with those. Travis just presented on one of the set-asides related to human service transportation, FTA 5310. So we have several of these set-asides that are dedicated to specific types of projects or specific types of things that we want to fund through our Transportation Improvement Program. And then we adjust the TIP, fairly frequently through either administrative modifications or, for the larger projects, policy amendments. So this committee, you all are so important to the work that we do. You embody the metropolitan transportation planning process. Remember, I said under federal law that we have what's known as a 3C, that's what it says in federal law, but a continuing cooperative and comprehensive planning process. You are the committee that helps us do that. You are the committee that brings together that three-legged stool of CDOT, DRCOG, RTD, Regional Air Quality Council, and the other folks who are represented at this table. You are very unique in our planning structure. Not every MPO has a committee like the RTC, so your function is really, really important to the work that we do. Very specifically, brass tacks, you review the recommendations that come from our transportation, which is our technical advisory committee, and you make recommendations to our DRCOG board. But I will say you in some ways have a co-equal representation with our DRCOG board when it comes to transportation functions. If we are sort of, adopting a plan, making a TIP amendment, something related to transportation, the action that you take here and the action the DRCOG board takes needs to be identical. That happens 99.5% of the time. I think only once or twice in my 14 years has there ever been a difference. But if there ever was, we come back to both committees or both entities to make sure that we can get a matching action. That's how important the transportation work is that you do. You also directly facilitate our annual TAC review, which is coming to you in the next month or two, and you approve directly our special interest seats on our Transportation Advisory Committee. And then last but not least, I've kind of said this already, but I can't emphasize enough that you do provide that guidance and support to us. You really have been champions to us in some of the work that we do. I'll give you the example of safety in our Regional Vision Zero work when we started doing that a few years ago. It was really this committee that prompted us, that said, shoot for the stars. What can you do? Be innovative, push the envelope around safety. You encourage us to do that kind of work, and it's very important to us. I am not going to read this off to you. You can see sort of the membership of you all sitting at this table. This is who you are. The point that I want to make here is that while we have a quorum, which is 12 members of our 17 members of our TC, takes 12 members to make a quorum, it's actually more than that. We believe so strongly in that partnership of the agencies that one of our quorum requirements is that we have at least two, and this is why Cam and now Jazz call you up every month and say, hey, who's coming from RTD? Who's coming from CDOT? Because we actually want a minimum of two members from each agency so that two agencies don't overrule a third agency. That partnership is important to us in how we conduct this committee's work. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but just wanted to show you kind of some continuing and upcoming things that we've been working on as a staff that have either come to you or will come to you. I mentioned the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan update. Just a few months ago, we adopted our active transportation plan update. Really excited about that. Just like today, we have TIP set-aside calls that come to you. As you know, we're starting work on our next major update to our transportation improvement program, which will be our 29 through 32 TIP. I've already talked to you a little bit, and we'll continue to talk to you about surface transportation reauthorization, safety and Vision Zero, regional housing strategies, work that we're doing, have been doing, and nearing completion, and doing work right now around our regional housing strategy and land use transportation coordination. I've talked to you about MPO expansion. I believe we recently presented to you on our transportation, what we call Build to Move, our transit and transportation efficient design standards. And then you will hear later today about the latest update on our bus rapid transit implementation work. So that was a lot. That was your drink from a fire hydrant, but wanted to present all that to you and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Questions or comments?
Hi. Here's a question. Maybe you'll understand why I'm asking. What is your total budget for DRCOG? And how are you funded? What are your revenue sources?
Well, Doug, do you want me to start answering, or you just want to take that one?
Well, I can start it. Total budget for the admin, that's everything over 100 million. So it's like 110 million, something like that.
Okay.
Pass through. Yeah. Primary sources of funding is primarily federal, a little bit of the state, and about 3% of our budget is member contribution or member dues, which we use to match the administrative for us to do the work.
So it's about 100 million,
Mm-hmm.
but you said most of it is grants to our member organizations.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Questions? All right, thanks, Jacob.
Thank you very much.
All right, next up is community-based transportation planning updates. And I believe Lauren's here and Brittany. Brittany Compton, planner, and Lauren Curious are planners for transportation planning and operations.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Curtis. I'm joined by my colleague, Brittany Compton. We're both multimodal planners here at DRCOG. Today, we're going to be giving you an update on our community-based transportation planning program. Okay, so the community-based transportation planning program is one of our transportation improvement program set-asides. And this program provides technical assistance to our local member governments. And the goal of this set-aside is really to improve mobility options for low-income and historically disadvantaged communities in the DRCOG region. And so one of the things that we focus on heavily in these projects is community engagement. And we try to reach people who are low income and historically have been left out of the planning process, to hear from them and to understand their experiences. And these projects are also very much implementation oriented. So these projects aren't meant to be like long range planning. They're more so meant to be short-term actionable recommendations and even some pilot projects. So the way that this program is structured, we've had $2.5 million in our 24 to 27 TIP. And we have a call for projects each year in the fall. And so we recently completed actually 5 projects now as of this month. But today we're going to be sharing 4 of those recently completed projects. And so, like I mentioned, we have a call for projects each year in the fall. These projects are nominated by local or regional agencies. They submit a letter of interest. And then those projects that are selected through that process are then managed by DRCOG staff. So the way it works is DRCOG maintains those funds. We want to make it as easy as possible for the nominating agencies. So we do the procurement process, and then we kind of lead project management here at DRCOG. Okay, so like I said, we're going to take you through very quickly 4 of our recently completed projects. The first one is the 92nd Avenue Corridor Study. This project was submitted by the City of Federal Heights, and it was submitted because the city was really concerned with some very urgent safety issues, particularly around pedestrian safety. They had had a really terrible recent pedestrian fatality on this street. And so this corridor study focused on 92nd, just within the City of Federal Heights, between Federal Boulevard and Pecos Street, about a 1-mile corridor. The street's also on our high injury network. And what we found as part of this project when we went out and spoke with the community is that community members were also very much concerned with safety and speeding. And those were the top issues that they wanted to see addressed through this project. So ultimately, with our recommendations, we had some both short-term recommendations and a long-term vision. And this was important to the city to have both. They wanted to have some short-term actionable recommendations that were lower cost that they could implement quickly, but they also wanted a more long-term permanent solution and vision that they could pursue as funding becomes available to them. So the short-term improvements include paint and post chicanes and paint and post medians, and a couple of RRFB enhanced crossings. And then the long-term vision includes raised concrete median islands, 2 roundabouts, a shared use path for people walking and biking, and 2 pedestrian hybrid beacons. Our next project is a 303 Artway and Montbello Loop implementation plan. So this project was nominated by the Trust for Public Land, and it was kind of unique in that it included kind of 2 projects in one, and these 2 projects were community-generated projects, and this project looked to help these 2 projects get better ready for implementation. And so those 2 projects are the 303 Artway in Northeast Park Hill and the Montbello Loop in Montbello. And these two projects are similar in nature. They were both kind of developed by the community. They're both in Northeast Denver. They're both related to improvements for people walking and biking. And the project team included Radian, which is a nonprofit planning firm who's been really involved with the 303 Artway for many years, the Montbello Organizing Committee, and then Denver Dottie as the implementing agency. So the recommendations that came out of this project identified some short, mid, and long-term steps towards implementation, while also providing some planning level cost estimates and proposed cross-sections. But really importantly with this project is that we worked on getting the recommendations aligned with the implementing agency Denver, the City and County of Denver's design standards, and their existing and upcoming programs and projects. So that as the City of Denver takes on various projects such as road repaving or like channel improvements with the Mile High Flood District in Montbello, that these recommendations for these two projects are in a place that they can be ready for implementation. Okay, now I'm going to pass it to Brittany to talk about Brighton and Pecos and some of our upcoming projects.
The Brighton Core City Circulation Plan. So this was submitted by the City of Brighton. Also related to projects that are submitted are on the high injury network. So this is one of them, seeing 599 crashes between 2019 to 2020. So that is a street called Bridge Street, and it goes east starting at the South Platte River, west of the South Platte River, going east to 22nd Avenue. And then we had a half-mile buffer on the study area. So they were just looking at making some changes for safety for all users of the road. So for this plan, we ended up recommending a couple of things. Like a couple of the other plans, we did have shorter and longer term recommendations. So some of the shorter term recommendations, like updated striping, have actually been put into Brighton's Transportation Preservation and Improvement Project starting next year. So we've been really excited to see the timing line up to where we can actually see some of these short-term safety improvements put into place. And then we have some longer-term recommendations related to adding medians, different places with landscaping. There was, a lot of concern with narrow sidewalks that were close to the road and difficulty with pedestrians and cyclists crossing the road at certain points. So we're having a lack of options to cross the road, and so that's something that we also recommended in the plan. The other plan that we worked on was the Pecos Corridor study in Adams County. So that was submitted by Adams County. We were working on just a section of it from 62nd Parkway to 84th Avenue, and that was an unincorporated Adams County. Though we did hear a lot of interest from people further up north for improvements along Pecos. So this was for all users, and Pecos is also on DRCOG's high injury network. So we really wanted to try to improve that. So this turned into more of a community informed vision for a long-term vision with some short-term recommendations, but more of a long-term kind of overhaul of the corridor. So a couple of the recommendations are related to public identity. This corridor is kind of missing a lot of the character that kind of define the area. So, things like art, outdoor patios, landscaping, really kind of limited in this area. There are a couple of recommendations depending on the segments for different crossings for bikes and pedestrians. Perfect. Yeah, and then we have the Lakewood and Harlan Street Community Crossing Study, which we've since kind of, yeah, I think they've renamed it, I don't know. It's been a couple different names, but basically an overpass or underpass over 6th Avenue to connect some underserved neighborhoods. So yeah, we definitely encourage all of our local jurisdictions to apply for funding in the fall when the letters of interest open. These aren't like super intense formal applications. It's a letter of interest. We'd be happy to talk with any of you that are interested or answer any questions that you have. If you have anything related to, underserved communities, it doesn't have to be based off of the DRCOG index. It could be, maybe employees working in a certain area that are underserved, but they don't live in the area, or, you can kind of define the community. So definitely talk with Lauren or I, or feel free to email us if you have any questions about the program. Thank you, Brittany and Lauren, for your presentation today. Do we have questions or comments?
Chair, if I may, thank you very much. Thank you both for the presentation today. This is relatively new for us. This is our first full cycle through. We did a pilot first, right? Is that right? This is our first. And listen, I think, the reason we started that, actually, I had seen it at a conference. There was some, I can't remember what community, what region had been doing it, but I was really impressed by their ability to reach out and reach these marginalized communities, because they've always been so tough to get engaged in transportation planning process. So staff have done such a wonderful job on this. My question is, you mentioned, about local governments applying for upcoming calls, and I think that's obviously wonderful. For those that are here from RTD as well as CDOT commissioners, if you hear of projects or, hotspots or problem areas within your own districts, keep this in mind, that, reach out and have conversations with the local government within your districts about this program, because most know about it, but certainly, mostly the planning folks do. So, but please keep this in mind if you hear of anything from constituents that this is a need. Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Doug stole some of my thunder, but let me add to what Doug said. This is a relatively new, it's not so new anymore, it's 3 or 4 years already working in this model, but it's something we hadn't done before, right? And I want to point out a couple of very specific aspects. One is that the idea here was going into community just because, right? Communities are used to hearing from all of us when there's a project or there's something coming, and we engage with them as we should, right? But the premise here is that, well, what if there's something the community is interested, not tied to any of our plans, not tied to an upcoming project, but just an issue or problem, or solution within a community, but something they're interested in that we can help them and just meet them where they are and just work in community for its own sake. And that's a little bit alluded to, is that new way of working for us in that, we fund these projects through our tip set aside. We manage the consultant. Local governments, nonprofits don't have to contribute any money. We just want their time and commitment, right? So we're providing the resources, we're managing the project, but we're working in close partnership. I said a 3-legged stool earlier. I think some of these are like 5 or 6-legged stools, where we're working with a local government, we're working with a nonprofit, where we're working with a community group or groups, call all of them sort of equal standing at the table to try and accomplish and really navigate through a complicated situation potentially within a community. The last thing I'll say, I didn't mean to make this so long, is that, to Doug's point about if you hear something, one of the unique features of this program, and when we started this, we're like, well, what is an underserved community? How would we define that? And there are ways that we can define that, and what's disproportionate impact to community under state law. But what we ended up with is, you tell us, right? What makes your community unique? That needs this service or needs this help, you tell us and you make the case to us, and then if we select your project, we come and help you. And I'm really intrigued and excited by the work that we've been doing in that model. So thank you.
Darius, do you have a...
Yeah, I think some of my questions are with some of the next steps and some of the expectations after you develop these plans, because some of the recommendations after you see these plans can be fairly expensive. Looking at the Pecos option, the full reconstruction, $121 million. That could be fairly length of time before you're able to come up with that type of funds in order to reconstruct based off the plans that you come up with it. So I was curious on what are some of the next steps? Are we looking at quick wins for that community based off of what you heard, or what are some of the next steps that you're able to take after you develop these plans?
Good question. Yeah, Pecos also had some shorter term improvements. I think a lot of our studies, we try to have those quick wins to make sure that it's not just like, thanks for your input, now wait, 20, 30 years to find out what will happen. So I think we're trying to do like more of a phased approach for that one, and understanding that ultimately once we help the jurisdiction with the project, we can look for funding opportunities, but ultimately handing that plan over to the jurisdiction to try to look for funding in the future. And so, if there's immediate funding available, our consultant or we can try to identify what that is, but a lot of it is, kind of those longer term, waiting for the right opportunities for those bigger budgets like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Not to make this so much longer, but a smile came to my face in hearing this, because I actually was a part of the 303 Artway project years ago when I was in Urban Land Conservancy. That project started out of affordable housing development work going on in Northeast Park Hill, and just by virtue of being there and talking with the neighborhood, hearing needs related to, curb cuts that don't make sense, or where they aren't any, as you're maybe a mid-block and there's an ADA ramp at the corner, but not where the alley is halfway down the street, things like that. And so we would go around with neighbors and with red squares and green squares and asking them about these things. But it was always so hard to pull these partners together. And then where's the funding coming from? And it just kept being in fits and starts. And so to know now that it's, it had moved on well with Radian and with TPL, and exactly to what you all at DRCOG are naming, is these things are happening in the community. So I just wanted to speak up here, just kind of to bring that voice of community that represents one of those projects into this room, that like this is, I'm just so overjoyed to know that this is where that's gone, because that's what we were searching for so long. And we're like, these people's voices are not being heard. And how can we get this in a way that it is integrated with other plans that are going to happen? Because this is not communities on their own can't show up and say, fund this thing. And, it's like, what's the timing of it? What's the money of it? And so this is an incredible innovation. And thank you for that work.
Director Clark, you just made the day of every staff person in this room, so thank you.
All right, any other comments or questions? All right, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Brittany, very much. All right, our last informational briefing is Advancing Bus Rapid Transit Implementation Study Update. Nora is going to present from the Sub-Area and Project Planning Program.
All right, you're getting the full Sub-Area and Project Planning team today. Hello, everyone. My name is Nora Kern. I manage the Sub-Area and Project Planning team here at DRCOG. And I'm excited just to give an update to a project that we've been working on for a number of years, and kind of let you know where we're at. So this is our Advancing BRT Implementation Project. So just a brief history to kind of get us all up to speed. Several, start way back when, the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan currently has 11 individual BRT networks plus the bus maintenance facility in it. And it's a lot for the region. Don't need to get into the full history, but a couple of years ago, DRCOG and RTD and CDOT and Denver and other partners kind of came together and said, this is a great vision, but how are we going to make this happen? It's particularly challenging because in the DRCOG region, we're not expecting a single agency to deliver all 11 of these BRT corridors. We already know Denver and RTD are leading on Colfax. CO 119 is being led by, CDOT Region 4. You have Federal Boulevard that CDOT Region 1 is taking, or CDOT is taking the lead on. So it's a real challenge of figuring out how we kind of, as our tagline has become build a regional network and not just 11 individual BRT projects. And it's particularly important because we know as people traveling through the region, they don't know whether or not a project's been built by CDOT or by RTD or by somebody else. So we had a couple kind of early themes of what we needed to talk about. And so a regional BRT partnership came together. We started meeting monthly over 3 years ago to look at how can we work together? How can we accelerate these projects, make sure they all happen? How can we pay for them all and make sure we're not competing with each other on these projects? What do they look like? How do we make sure a rider on the CO 119, can get on the bus easily, just as someone on the federal BRT corridor? And how do we work together to learn from each other so that we're not repeating the same mistakes and kind of working together as a region? As a last bullet, we also thought, hey, it would be really great if we could find a grant to help us with this, because we all have day jobs, and this was kind of a little bit of a side project for all of us in the midst of kind of making these corridors a reality. So just a recap, the partnership, like I said, it is kind of the big regional agencies, DRCOG, RTD, and CDOT. And then we had the big cities that had multiple BRT corridors, so Denver, Aurora, as well as the 119 Coalition and the city of Littleton. More recently, we've also formed what I'm calling a BRT Partnership Plus, which is all of the other jurisdictions that are touching one of these BRT corridors, but maybe don't need to be in monthly meetings, but kind of want to have a seat at the table. So you can see all of those on the side of the slide. So that work could kind of been going on, like I said, for several years. And that brings us to this new project, the Advancing BRT Implementation. So I don't even know, 2 or 3 years ago, I forget, it's a blur, there was, we realized there was a grant opportunity through the U.S. Department of Transportation's Build America Bureau, which is maybe best known for managing TIFIA loans and a number of other finance options. It's called the Innovative Asset Finance and Asset, I think I have asset in there twice, Innovative Finance and Asset Concessionaire Grant, IFAC. No one can remember the name clearly, not even myself. So we decided to go for it. We applied in 2024. We won $900,000 in roundabouts, just about $1 million. Time goes along, takes a while to get contracted. We finally got the money and are now under contract with the team led by HNTB and have officially kicked off the project. So I wanted to kind of bring you a little bit of an update of what's involved and what we have ahead of us. So the project really speaks to some of those core goals that the Regional BRT Partnership had already established. So it's really narrowly focused on developing funding, financing, and implementation strategies for the next 5 corridors. So obviously a couple are already in advanced construction or design. So the next 5 up in the Regional Transportation Plan are Colfax BRT Next out in Aurora, the Spearley-Still Parker study, corridor Alameda, Broadway Lincoln, and then the extension of 119 from the city of Longmont out to the I-25 Mobility Hub. And so these are all in different stages of planning, but none of them have kind of advanced to, or at least when we applied, haven't advanced to a locally preferred alternative. So we're not trying to replace the corridor-specific planning that's going to happen on each of these projects, but instead kind of develop tools, best practices, and a strategy to make sure that we're working on these projects collectively with strategy without, competing with each other, duplicating resources and efforts. And then part of that is also, we really just want to continue to build staff capacity and knowledge in this region about how we can deliver these types of projects. So there are a couple kind of key challenges. Like I've said, these projects are led by different agencies, which is definitely a challenge. They're all in different various planning stages, from a line on the map to, have had, like Spearley-Still Parker has probably had 10 different studies in the last 20 years. We know there's limited funding in the world, and we, have had a little bit of a fragmented approach. So we're trying, it's, challenging to build on lessons learned. And an important thing, particularly in the funding piece, is the potential to have that competition between the corridors instead of working together as a region. So the kind of core goals are, first, we really just want to define what is BRT in the region. We keep using this term, BRT, but what do we all mean? Are we all saying it and meaning the same thing? How can we have a consistent methodology to understand what these projects are going to cost? We have a couple costs out there in the universe, but we honestly just need to get our arms wrapped around, both for capital as well as operating and maintenance. What are we kind of talking about? And then how can we explore every possible avenue for funding, really shaking the tree and looking underneath every stone. And then kind of a roadmap, particularly on the funding and financing, knowing that there'll be separate planning processes to decide where stations go and what the BRT would look like and all of those questions. So we have a couple key deliverables, which I'm going to run through quickly, but I think common threads throughout all of these that I wanted to highlight is first and foremost, improve regional collaboration. Let's work together. Let's build our staff capacity as a region so we can kind of be strategic. And then how can we have reusable tools? We know that these maybe aren't the last BRT projects that could happen in the region. So how can we have tools that we can update and revise and use again as we advance these projects? So first, project management, nothing too crazy about that. But our first task was the BRT pipeline and cost framework, which is really where are they in the planning process? What lessons kind of are the best practices latest in the industry? We've actually been doing some peer interviews with Seattle and Charleston and Northern Virginia and Minneapolis. Next, we've been trying to define the core elements of what do we mean by BRT. If we're going to set cost estimates, we need to understand kind of generally what we're talking about. And then kind of that foundational task is developing cost estimates, which is challenging. Like I said, some of these are lines in the map, so we're kind of trying to develop updated ranges. What's the ballpark of what we're talking about here, just so we can understand the scale of the challenge ahead of us as a region. Next, and very important, is we are developing some regional BRT design guidelines. I'm calling them guidelines, not standards. There's a number of efforts underway around the region. Denver, CDOT, RTD, CO7 Coalition all have developed kind of more specific design standards, getting into the details of, bus stop design and lane widths and that sort of stuff. So what we're really focused on here is first, kind of what is that shared understanding again of what is BRT. BRT in Denver is not the same as it is in, Bogota, Colombia, or in Seattle. So what do we kind of think is reasonable here in the region? And what do we need to work on as a region to make sure that from a rider, a bus operator, and a general member of the traveling public perspective, that this makes sense as a system? We know that projects are being developed in different parts of the region by different agencies, but from a bus rider's perspective, it doesn't matter if you're getting on the CO, that 119 corridor, or if you're getting on Federal Boulevard, you want to be able to pay the same way, you want to have the same kind of branding. So what do we need to kind of work on as a region to make that consistent? Next, kind of the big one is thinking about how can we pay for these things. So this is both looking at capital, of course, but also maintenance and operations. What are all the funding sources? Obviously federal, there's a number of new state options, but really spending some time with the local funding options. And trying to be creative. Are there things we haven't considered? Are there things that are allowable in the state that we could pursue to pay for some of these needs? And we're looking both to align those funding strategies with corridors. So maybe something works well for Spear, Leedsdale, Parker, but isn't a good fit for the 119 extension. But also thinking about, are there some strategies we could pursue as a group, particularly I think as maintenance and operations, rather than each corridor individually trying to solve the problem of how do we upkeep the bus stops and those sorts of things. Is there a way we could pursue funds as a collective to help address some of these questions? So coming up with the funding options, and then also looking at financing. We know that's a piece of it. Not just, we can't just pursue grants. We need to think about how it'll all work on the money side. Along with that is we know that a number of, particularly the local funding options, we might need to understand the legal authority, who can pursue them. Are there any steps that need to happen in order to pursue those funding options? What's the kind of timeline? Are there any legal restraints? I know Tabor's already been brought up. How would some of these funding options, need to handle Tabor and other kind of specific challenges? And then we're hoping to develop an implementation framework. So taking all those funding options, kind of staging them by corridor and by funding option, what would need to happen, A before C, and kind of answer the questions of how we could fit all these very complicated puzzle pieces together. And then the last two pieces are kind of knit into that overarching strategy. One is identifying public sector roles. I don't think we're imagining this is going to be like, you know, privatized BRT, but is there a role for the public sector on maintenance or on some piece of this, or in the delivery, construction, and operations? This is a little bit of a requirement of the grant, but we just wanted to make sure we're looking under every rock. And then last is the final plan, which we currently anticipate will be about a year from now. So this is our project schedule. We're currently in the thick of things with our cost estimates and our design guidelines. And this shortly now will be kicking off the funding and financing strategy piece for the kind of remainder of the time. So happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Nora. Questions or comments for Nora today? Wow. Yeah. Larson.
Where's the button? Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering, is one of the things that you might see as an outcome of this being sort of a way to kind of hold BRTs to a high standard of what a BRT actually is?
Yeah.
Because I'm a little bit involved with this Colorado BRT project, and one of the things that seems to be happening is that CDOT seems to be pushing it away from what I would consider a BRT and more just kind of sort of a you know, mixed flow that and things like that. And I mean, it would be great if there was sort of a standard that ensured there, you know, there was dedicated lanes and that really would actually make the bus more rapid, you know, within some relatively ambitious criteria. Is that something you think might come out of this?
I think the short answer is yes and no. Yes, that is generally what we're hoping. I mean, we do want to set that minimum threshold and our shared expectation of a region of what BRT means. Does it have to be fully dedicated 100% of the way? You know, does it have to have TSP? Does it have to have X, Y, and Z? So yes, we are trying to kind of set that standard. And the reason I say no, though, is this isn't a binding document. So we're kind of doing this through our DRCOG usual way of collaboration and trying to bring everyone to the table. We know that each corridor is also different. So there, you know, what makes a bus run very frequently, reliably, and quickly in Aurora on Colfax Extension, it might be different than what's needed on Colorado, and the local context is different, and the land use is different, and the, you know, development is different. So we're both trying to kind of set a floor and set an agreed upon standard, while also recognizing that every corridor is different, and we also can't force any of us to, you know, future planning decisions. And we know that those decisions are really tough. There's a lot of trade-offs on these corridors. So we're trying to do both at once, which is a challenge, but that's kind of the original idea, is exactly what you're talking about. Jacob, anything to add?
Yeah, no, thank you. That was an excellent answer. And I would just add a little bit to that, because it's a good question, Director Larson. Yeah, each corridor, each project is going to be unique, right? So some of the things that we're looking for is a common experience for the rider. So, you know, wherever you are in the region, getting on a BRT, it should kind of feel like you're part of a system, right? And that could be branding, it could be fare media. Stations will probably be a little bit different in each corridor, reflecting local community character. But we're building a system. There is some uniqueness within each corridor. And I'll give you the example. What's held up in this country, at least, is the gold standard for bus rapid transit is the Health Line in Cleveland, Ohio. Has anyone ridden on the Health Line? It is amazing to see. But even in the length of that corridor, and I think it's something like 15 miles, maybe, give or take, from downtown Cleveland out to the east, even within that corridor, this one BRT line operates in street, operates in its own lane, operates on the shoulder, right? So even this one project has different ways of operating just within that particular project and corridor. So as Nora said, we're trying to make it together where we can.
Questions or comments?
Thank you. Thanks for that good presentation discussion as well. I guess not only is RTD having trouble, but we're having trouble with copper wire theft, having trouble keeping the lights along Federal lighted, as an example. Is that one piece of the infrastructure that you might be able to tackle? Better design something, protection, so that we don't face that?
Yeah, that's I would say generally we're not getting into that level of detail, but that's kind of one of the roles of the BRT partnership is where there are those lessons learned. Hey, we're having this problem over here. Is there a solution that we can apply around the region? That is definitely a hope. I'm not sure if we've talked about that one specifically, but maintenance has come up a lot of, how are we doing maintenance? Who's doing maintenance, especially on these multi-jurisdictional corridors, like federal, where you have, a lot of different local governments. So I guess we aren't looking at it specifically, but hoping to kind of bring together a space where we can talk about those types of challenges and come up with shared solutions.
Mr. Kondo.
Delon, yeah. Especially appreciate the approach to identifying financing mechanisms and operating mechanisms as well. Thank you for all that.
Mr. Kondo.
Madam Chair, on financing strategies, a couple of thoughts. Have you engaged whether large employers or chambers of commerce to see if some of these BRT projects, I know that businesses may not like it because it actually constrains the number of potential customers coming in, but at the end of the day, maybe you do have companies or corporations that really do see benefit of helping their employees get from home to work. And what causes me to think this, sorry to interrupt you, but is there was a field study trip that we did to Redmond, Washington, when we visited Puget Sound Regional Council and thinking about Microsoft and other large employers that are trying to figure out how to fund transportation projects to make it easier for their employees to get to the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is definitely part of what the kind of private sector involvement we're hoping will include. This project is a little bit internal facing. We're kind of just developed toolkits and kind of work with our agent. We're not going to spend hours, but we're hoping to kind of prepare all of us, our coworkers, with the tool. We can go out, say on Still Parker, and talk to University of Colorado in Auraria to kind of say what would be the ask, what even would we ask, what how would that fit into something else. So I think that of private involvement is exactly where we're hoping to kind of get some ideas and strategies of how those types of groups could be involved. And we know that in other BRT corridors, the business community has been a really big part of the conversation. We actually talked to the Low Country Rapid Ride program, which is in Charleston, South Carolina. Not a place you necessarily think of as being the most transit friendly, but their business community has been hugely excited about the project and really helped kind of push it forward because of exactly what you said, connecting employees, thinking about the redevelopment opportunities that could come with the investment in these corridors. So that's something to get some tools for, but probably won't be having all of those individual conversations through this project.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Nora? All right, thank you very much. Great, thank you. Move on to our administrative items. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Commissioner Cook for updates from CDOT.
I'll defer to Jerry. I'll chime in.
It's been a pretty, well, I shouldn't say that. The main issue is, of course, the wildfires that have been happening throughout the state. So we've been working on responses, particularly the Aspen Acres fires, and with those. So that's been the main issue that's been happening throughout the state. So we wish the first responders well in dealing with that. As far as other matters that have been going on there, so in regards to what we had talked about earlier, I have personally written the letter and sent that over to the governor's office. So hopefully we'll see if the DRCOG boundaries have expanded here in the near future. So,
and a big thank you from DRCOG staff.
So, I kid on that, but that is we'll see that in the next few weeks. So, we recently passed our FY 27 to 30 STIP, so that has been passed by the Transportation Commission and FHWA, and I think we'll have a very truncated Transportation Commission meeting next week as well. So I think it's just the wildfire response is the big news coming out of CDOT for this month. So, Commissioner Cook.
Missing a beat with these. Yeah, I liked that you mentioned the wildfires because that is all consuming for everybody. And but I would note that there was a bridge knocked out south of Beulah on Colorado 165 right at the beginning of the fires. It was a critical access point for both emergency responders as well as evacuees, people getting out of those areas. And CDOT crews managed to find a way to rebuild that bridge for temporary use within 11 hours. Or actually, I should say they started on the next day and then finished overnight in 11 hours. That was really, really remarkable. Also, Darius gave us an update, and there have been various NOFOs, and CDOT's been applying for grants for a number of areas, but the ones that come to my mind are FRA, I think, offered grants for grade separations and other railroad safety improvements, and I think CDOT has applied for 3 within the Burnham area. And then I know for a fact, too, that the Division of Transit and Rail have written letters in support of 2 applications in the metropolitan area, one for Arvada and one for Longmont. So hopefully some of those come through.
Those 2. I'm going to turn it over to our General Manager Johnson for update from RTC.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. I'll start and then yield the floor to the RTD directors that are in the room. First and foremost, I want to say that RTD is progressing with its investment in its state of good repair regarding the downtown rail reconstruction project. As you have heard me say on many occasions, basically, we are investing in the infrastructure, i.e. bringing it back to where it should be after reaching its 30-year useful life. Work commenced on June 7th. We're making progress with site demolition. 2 areas in particular of which we have a laser-like focus would be the mid-block sections along Stout between 16th and 17th currently, in addition to Colfax Avenue alignment from 7th Street to Kalamath. Additionally, something we're proud to talk about in partnership with Historic Denver, Denver Public Library, and the Downtown Denver Partnership, RTD embarked on a mobile tour whereby along the 16th Street corridor in commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the country, 150th anniversary of the state of Colorado, a QR-enabled tour allows you to hear from Dr. Colorado narrate historic elements along the alignment. So that's something. More specific in reference to our daily operations, I'm proud to announce that RTD PD became part of a nationally implemented program called ABLE. ABLE stands for Active Bystander Law Enforcement. So if you see some bad behavior that's not really within the purview of what a law enforcement officer should be doing, it provides adequate training for another officer to stand in without sort of usurping one's authority if they're command staff or something of the like. And we're excited about having that just by virtue of what we've been seeing going around in the country. And when we see something, we all should say something. Additionally, speaking about law enforcement, I know some people were tuned into the World Cup games earlier today, and RTD was proud to support its partners at MARTA, which is the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, in reference to providing extra law enforcement eyes and ears as it relates to the games that they are hosting with what they're calling the Atlanta Stadium. Work is progressing at the agency on a myriad of different things, but I'll yield the floor to the directors to speak about those that are more or less along policy lines. So with that, Director Banker, would you like to?
First of all, thank you very much for switching the time and giving us lunch. That was very nice. I appreciate that very much. It's a lot easier to get to a meeting, never knowing what the I-25 is going to do to your planned traffic and your trip. This is much nicer, so thank you. Really, the only thing I wanted to mention is beginning with our September run board, Longmont, Lafayette, and Louisville will be taking advantage of a new Skyride service. So it'll be leaving Longmont, heading down to Lafayette, Park and Ride, getting onto C-470 and going to DIA. We still need to get board approval for that, which will hopefully come on the 28th of July. But I will say folks in Longmont are extremely excited about this. I've gotten a lot of emails. It's made the newspaper over and over again. It's going on next door because it's very difficult, quite frankly, for Longmont folks to get to DIA. And I also know there are other board directors too that do not have direct access to the A line, our rail line that goes to DIA, that they're also interested in trying to improve Skyride service because it is difficult and it's very popular. And of course, we're still working on the budget and hopefully we're gonna wrap that up in the next couple of months, but that's still a challenge for us, but we'll get it fixed. So thank you. All
right, thank you. All right, we'll turn it over to date for air quality. Yeah, that's you, council report. Oh, what's the score first?
No, I wasn't checking the World Cup, but thank you.
I didn't call you out.
Thank you, Deborah. No, I was checking my weather for my evening meeting here. I have to go to Fort Collins, and that reminds me to announce that we've expanded a lot of our work that we've been doing in the DRCOG region with some new funding from CDOT and an enterprise, the non-attainment area enterprise that CDOT manages, to the north part of our non-attainment area, Fort Collins, Greeley, et cetera. So tonight is one of our events up there, so I'll be hitting the road here soon. But wanted to, just reiterate the wildfire is the issue from an air quality perspective. That's what gets everyone's attention, but it's only part of our problem. It is summertime ozone season, and the wildfires only exacerbate our already elevated ozone concentration. So we always appreciate all our partners here in the room today that help us with our messaging to the public to either take action to reduce their personal footprint, the emissions they can control, or to protect themselves and take action if they are impacted by poor air quality. And again, wildfires just makes that a much more difficult conversation. And we are just in the beginning of the heart of the high pollution season. So unfortunately, I'm sure we'll see elevated concentrations throughout the next few months as is our norm. And so I just encourage everyone to take that positive action and help the Regional Air Quality Council in our messaging to our partners. So thanks.
Very much. Any other comments from members?
Oh, also, just a little preview at our board meeting this coming Friday. You all might get some news that we've commissioned a health effects study of poor air quality, and that will be presented by our research community at our Friday board meeting. So their report is in final draft. It's being embargoed until the big day Friday morning, and so I'm just trying to figure out how to make the news that they will present manageable from a media perspective and reaction from our public and all of you, because these numbers won't be positive from an air quality perspective. They're difficult to comprehend. So if we continue to have high pollution, elevated ozone concentrations, the researchers are trying to document the economic impacts of pollution and the effects on public health. And so that's just kind of a heads up that there might be some news this coming Friday. Thank you.
Questions? Thanks. The good? We'll be back here August 4th. Thank you again for attending and having lunch together. So thank you very much.